The first film showed the rise of a legend, but the story stopped before the storm truly began. After the massive success of Michael, fans immediately started asking the same question: what comes next? Because after Michael ended with "His story continues," fans immediately realized something. The most complicated part of Michael Jackson's life hadn't even begun yet. Now, with reports confirming that Michael 2 is already in early development, the next chapter of Michael Jackson's life is starting to take shape. And it could be far darker, larger, and more emotional than the first movie. So today, we're breaking down everything we know so far about Michael 2. Michael 2 is in early development. Even though the studio hasn't officially announced Michael 2 yet, multiple reports indicate that the sequel is already moving through early development behind the scenes. And honestly, this was expected the moment the first film ended with the words, "His story continues." That line now feels less like a tease and more like a roadmap. According to interviews and industry reports, the filmmakers realized very early that Michael Jackson's life simply couldn't fit into one movie. The first film reportedly had over 4 hours of material before major sections were removed to keep the focus on his rise to fame. And that's where the sequel comes in. The first movie focused on the creation of the icon, the Jackson 5 era, the struggle for independence, and the explosive success of the Bad era. But everything after that was left untouched. Now the sequel is expected to continue the story from that exact point, exploring the years where Michael Jackson became not just a global superstar, but one of the most scrutinized figures in modern history. Dangerous and History era. One of the biggest details revealed so far is the timeline expected for the sequel. Reports suggest Michael 2 will move directly into the Dangerous and History eras, arguably the most complicated period of Michael Jackson's life and career. This was the phase where his fame reached another level entirely. Stadium tours became global events, every appearance became headline news. And musically, Michael continued evolving into something larger than pop culture itself. But at the same time, pressure started building. The sequel is expected to show both sides of this era, the artistic genius and the growing emotional isolation. This is where the world's obsession with Michael Jackson intensified, and where the line between performer and person became increasingly blurred. Visually, this period could become one of the most cinematic sections of the franchise. Massive world tours, iconic performances, music video recreations, and global media frenzy. All of it has the potential to push the sequel into a much bigger scale than the first film. But underneath all of that spectacle, the tone becomes darker. Because this is the era where fame stops feeling like victory and starts feeling like pressure. Neverland and Controversies. This is likely the biggest challenge facing the sequel. The first movie intentionally avoided diving deeply into the most controversial parts of Michael Jackson's life. But Michael 2 may not have that option. Reports indicate the sequel could explore investigations connected to Neverland Ranch, public allegations, media attacks, and eventually the 2005 trial. Events that completely changed how the world viewed Michael Jackson. And that's why the second film is expected to feel dramatically different in tone. This won't just be a music biopic anymore. It becomes a psychological and emotional story about someone living under nonstop public judgment while trying to maintain control of both his career and personal identity. Director Antoine Fuqua reportedly filmed material connected to these years already, but held it back from the first movie because the narrative became too large. If handled carefully, this section could become the emotional core of the sequel, showing not just controversy, but the loneliness and pressure behind it. Because regardless of public opinion, Michael Jackson was still living inside that storm. Jaafar Jackson returns. At the center of everything is Jaafar Jackson, who is expected to return for the sequel. And honestly, that may be one of the biggest strengths of the entire franchise. One reason the first movie connected so strongly with audiences was Jaafar's performance, not just visually, but emotionally. He didn't simply imitate Michael Jackson. He captured the movement, vulnerability, and intensity in a way that made the character feel human rather than mythic. That becomes even more important in part 2. Because the next chapter demands a more emotionally layered performance. This isn't only about stage presence anymore. It's about portraying a man trying to survive inside overwhelming fame, pressure, and controversy. And because Jaafar already established the younger and rising version of Michael in the first film, continuing with him creates emotional continuity for the audience. The story evolves, the tone darkens, but the same face carries the journey forward. Release date and future. So when could Michael 2 actually release? Right now, most reports point toward 2029 or 2030 as the most realistic release window. That may sound far away, but it makes sense considering the scale of the project. The sequel isn't just another continuation. It's potentially covering some of the most sensitive and complex years of Michael Jackson's life. That requires careful writing, production planning, legal considerations, music licensing, and extensive post-production work. And unlike the first movie, which focused heavily on triumph and rise, this sequel has to balance spectacle with emotional complexity. The studio also appears to be waiting to see the long-term performance and cultural impact of the first film before fully committing to the second chapter. But one thing is already clear. This story was never meant to end with one movie. The rise was only the beginning. The legacy comes next. And if Michael, 2026, showed the world how a legend was created, Michael 2 may finally reveal what it cost to live as one. And maybe that's why the story couldn't end with just one film. Because the rise of Michael Jackson was legendary. But the years that followed became something far more complicated, emotional, and unforgettable. If Michael, 2026, was about creating the icon, then Michael 2 may become the chapter that reveals the man behind it all. And judging by everything we know so far, the next part of this journey could be the most powerful one yet.